Welcome to another Erik Wait whiskey study, and in this video I'm going to be reviewing the Strathcolm 12-year-old single grain Scotch whiskey. I would say about 90% of what Scotland produces is blended Scotch whiskey. Probably 9% is single malt Scotch whiskey, and probably 1% is blended malt Scotch whiskey or single grain Scotch whiskey. And of whiskey tubers, you don't see us reviewing single grain or blended grain Scotch whiskeys very often. But if you want to understand Scotch whiskey, you need to understand all the various categories, not just in terms of what's stated in a textbook, but in terms of aromas and flavors, and understanding what a grain whiskey provides in terms of a profile to a blended Scotch whiskey, as well as a blended grain Scotch whiskey. Now, one of the important things to remember is the single, that word single, doesn't refer to the grain, it refers to the distillery. So this is a single distillery grain Scotch whiskey. Grain, when they use the word grain, what they're referring to is that it's not a malted barley or purely malted barley. So anything other than a malted barley whiskey, it's going to be called a grain whiskey. So this is made from wheat and malted barley. So even if it's not strictly a malted or 100% malted barley, they usually have a little bit of malted barley, even in Kentucky bourbon, because there's an enzyme provided that helps with converting starch into sugar and then consequently into alcohol. So really important to understand these, not in terms of what it says in textbook, but in terms of a profile. So if you're a student of Scotch whiskey, highly recommend seeking out a single grain Scotch whiskey just to try it. Now, when you go to a shop, you don't see a lot of them. You're mostly going to see single malt Scotch whiskeys and blended Scotch whiskeys. But I find I really like this one. I think it's a really good value. But before we get into this, let's get into my notes. Strathcolm Single Grain Scotch Whisky is produced by Angus Dundee Distillers. Angus Dundee has two single malt distilleries, Tomintoul, located in Speyside and Glenlivet region, and Glencadam, which is located in the Eastern Highlands of Scotland. They also have a bottling plant in Coatbridge near Glasgow. The Strathcolm range consists of a no-age statement, an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old, which has been bottled at 40% alcohol by volume using the finest wheat and malted barley. The 12-year-old has been aged for 12 years in American oak barrels, and it retails at about $30 in the US. Alrighty, so color-wise, it's sort of a golden amber in color, quite clear, bright, and shiny. I got some good legs. Medium plus viscosity on the nose. Medium plus intense aromas of. And the first thing you notice is it doesn't have that malty character that you get from single malts. I get orange character. I get some honey. Perhaps some lemon. Some nice floral notes. It smells sort of like an orange and honey candy. Maybe some lighter caramels, vanilla, cinnamon, nutmeg, and baking spices. On the nose, it reminds me of a Cragganmore 12, but without the maltiness. And in other ways, it sort of reminds me of a Japanese whiskey. If I was smelling this blind, I might take this as actually a Japanese whiskey. I think that's because Japanese whiskey tends to have this certain pristine cleanness to it because they have a clean wort, and so you're not getting that malty character. And I think that's sort of what reminds me of this, because there isn't a lot of heavy malt character on this. It reminds me of sort of the cleanness, the pristineness of many Japanese whiskeys. All right, on the palate. Very silky and very smooth. It glistens and glides across the palate. Pretty much the same in the front, in the middle, and the finish. You get that nice orange citrus character, honey, vanilla, cinnamon. I'm also getting some apples, almost like an apple juice character to it. kind of like the apple juice in your kids' lunch boxes. A medium length finish. Not a lot of development. Somewhat simple, but what you get on the nose, you get on the palate, it is a very nice whiskey. I actually like this one on ice. I like it a little bit cooler. Of course, I'm recording this, 3/4 of the way through July 2019, so it's a little bit warm today. It's a nice whiskey, not overly complex. If you wanted a whiskey as a base for cocktails, I think this would work really, really well, or just something as a really simple sipper. But this is not that sort of thought-provoking, complex whiskey that you sit there and mull over and contemplate it as you enjoy its evolution and development. It's just not that kind of a whiskey. But definitely, I would say, worth trying out. Now, in terms of giving it a score, I think you got to score single malts, comparing single malts with single malts, blended with blended, and so forth. So I haven't had a lot of experience with single grain whiskeys. I have had very, very, very nice blended grain whiskeys, particularly the Hedonism from Compass Box. I wasn't impressed with the Hedonism Compass Box whiskey until I started trying grain whiskeys. Then I really appreciated just how much they bring to the table with that particular whiskey. But I think this also, a grain whiskey versus a grain whiskey, puts it into a better context for understanding it. So quite simple. Of course, the Hedonism costs about 5 times as much as this. So you got to take that into consideration as well. Score-wise, in terms of enjoyment level, I'm going to give it a solid 85 points. Are there any better single grain whiskeys in this price range? Perhaps, but I don't know of any. If you happen to know of a really nice single grain Scotch whiskey, in fact, I actually Googled the top 10 single grain whiskeys, so there are some out there, but they're not cheap. So I don't know of any in this particular category. Anyway, still worth checking out, worth trying and getting to know a single grain Scotch whiskey. All right, if you have subscribed to this channel, I want to thank you very much. If you haven't yet subscribed, but you like watching my videos, I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe. Give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, and other social networking channels. And until next time, cheers.